Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that my running mate Angela Walker and I ran on in 2020. And probably the biggest news in the world this week was the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. And we have back for the third time, I think you're the only guest I've had on three times, Nidal, is Nidal Bitari, who is a Palestinian who grew up in Syria in the Yarmouk refugee camp and is from a family that has been essentially involved in Syrian and Palestinian and Syrian politics as well. We'll put an article up. I put it up before, but if people haven't read it, they should. Nidal wrote about how Hafez al-Assad, the father of the recent deposed dictator, met in his grandfather's home before they took power. The Ba'ath Party took power in the 60s. And full circle, that home was blown up by the Assad regime in the uprising that began in 2011, in which Nidal played a part. So Nidal has firsthand experience, and he said he hadn't done anything this week but talk to people in Syria. So I don't know anybody else better to have on this program to talk about what happened in Syria and what it means. So Nidal, what do you know about Syria? What can you tell us?
Well, thank you so much, Howie. I'm really honored to be three times on your program. That's such an honor. And yes, you're right. I mean, I have not really been doing anything in the last week except just like sitting like glued to the TV and to my phone, talking to people, congratulating everyone I knew, and like I talked to people who I didn't talk to in the last 10 years, for 10 years maybe. Just like I just wanted to congratulate everyone I knew because the collapse of the Assad regime is. Um how we can put it? I mean, it's big. I mean, um, so no, no, like just let me say that like I would like at the beginning to remember all these people who we lost in the last 13 years, and we were hoping that we will see them freed, and I'm sad that they could not see this day, and I hoped when the rebels were freeing people in prisons, I was hoping that I will see some faces, some of my friends who disappeared in the last 13 years. Unfortunately, none of them uh, is alive now. Which is like this is the story of the Syrian revolution. How many people Al-Assad killed? How many people he imprisoned? How many people he displaced? How many neighborhoods he destroyed? And how he pushed Syrians to limits that I don't know um, how any other nation could really survive. Like Al-Assad's war in Syria was a genocidal war in every aspect and tactic he used. Um, However, I'm glad that he's gone, and I've really never seen the Syrian people as happy as these days ever in my life, ever in my life. I mean, I was born during Al Assad, the father, and like he was like that the depression he would bring to life is enough to be born in his era and to look at the faces of the people who are growing up among, and you don't see them laughing and happy ever in their lives. And then out of the sudden, like you see very genuine vibrant happiness and the smiles coming out of the faces of all Syrians everywhere and everyone, whoever they are. Even the people, I believe, even the people who had to support the regime and supported the regime inside Syria, Um, they are really happy that he's gone. Um, so no one knows really what happened, and but I will tell you that I am one of the people who lost hope at some point, and I did not see this day coming at all, and how mistaken I was. Uh, and then in a day and a night, we saw Al-Assad regime collapsed like a house of cards. All the power that we believed for years and years that he had in his hands, it was really nothing. Without the Russians, without the Iranian militias, without the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and without Hezbollah, because those are the powers who really kept him intact in power for the last 13 years. Um, what we are witnessing today in Syria is like phenomenal in every single aspect of it. Starting from the military operation that went from the far north of Syria to the far south in the matter of days and hours. The level of zero to non resistance from the Syrian army also was baffling for everyone. Um, the way in which that Bashar al-Assad himself left the country. The last reports I'm reading and hearing is that he left without even telling his family in Syria. Like he did not tell his brother who he co-ruled the country with him since 2000. Um, but what is amazing and significant uh, is the level of peaceful and uh, managed transition that the rebels were able to do, not only with the institutions of the former government, but also with people on the ground. And I really want to talk more about this very issue because I know that everyone in the West now, whether they are governments or parties, activists, scholars, they are only focusing on one issue, which is HTS. Al Qaeda is ruling Damascus, um, which, to start with, is a very wrong statement. Um, I will not go into the history of how we came to this day, but I just want to, in a nutshell, say that Jabhat al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda affiliated back then Jabhat al-Nusra, and then when they abandoned Al-Qaeda and became HTS, they came to power and they became the powerful faction in Syria because of the lack of the support that all the other secular powers in Syria and the Free Syrian Army back then had. In some sense, this HTS is the production of the lack of intervention, all the wrong intervention of the international community in the last 13 years. However, there are so many things has changed in HTS itself, and the dynamic and the systematic changes that they did, whether they liked it or not. Sometimes they were forced to make changes on the ground when they ruled Idlib in northern Syria, northwest. So, and we cannot hide and rule out at all the level of support that the Turkish government gave to HTS and to other armed groups, that the Turkey put them in one body and called it the Syrian National Army or the National Syrian Army, one of these two terms. And they were the only two powers that have been controlling northwest Syria for the last 5-6 years since the collapse of Aleppo and the massacres and the genocide that the Russians committed in Aleppo in 2015 and 16. Um, anyway, it, while when HTS took over northwest Syria, I have to remind myself and others that all the international community, UN, the US government, and the EU, most of the EU countries, and the EU itself, they froze and limited and stopped sometimes their support to all the civil society, all the activists and actors who were displaced to that one place because of HTS. So the only governance and power that they really had is whatever INGOs could pour in that small region of Idlib and part of Aleppo, and the support of the Turkish government through taking over the governance of some areas in northern Syria, like Manbij for Jarablus, for example. So in these terms, and let's just also remember that Idlib, northwest Syria, became the place where all Syrians from every single governorate and city and village in Syria, in the east and west and south, were displaced to. So, for the first time in the history of the Syrian people, they were all forced to live all together from every single village in the country in one city and one governorate, which was Idlib. And this coexistence that they created for themselves in northwest Syria was not always fun, was not always peaceful, was not always um the ideal one, because we have to remember, like, the Kurdish Afrin area in northwest Syria and what happened there. But over time, in the last years, HTS had to govern all the Syrian people who were gathered in one governorate, and they had to find revenues for their governance. Um, and the support of the INGOs was one of the big revenues that built the governance capacity, not of HTS, but of the Syrian people and the Syrian and the local councils and whatever institutions the Syrians themselves could establish and sometimes create, because there was some kind of creativity in managing for the Syrian activists and the Syrian civil society to be part of this governance experience that they gathered together. So Syrians, like in the last, between the falling of Aleppo and the falling of Bashar al-Assad, they all what they have been doing is just trying to live together, trying to survive in the internally displaced camps, IDP camps in northwest Syria, uh, and uh, and to live with the minimum, and to try to build a governance system with the minimum support that they could gather, let alone the other obstacles that they have, which was ISIS. Was one of them, because ISIS tried to take over, keep fighting the Assad regimes and the Russian air jets and their strikes on the civilian neighborhoods and communities in northwest Syria. So this experience made HTS or forced HTS. I don't know if actually force is the right description. Maybe this was the natural improvement or development of HTS itself, because they had to deal with people, they had to deal with all Syrians, they had to live with them and govern them. So they started to listen to these to people on the ground. They started to have uh, to learn from the Turkish experience in managing other areas in the north, because they are the only, really the only country that invested in governing some areas in northern Syria. I'm really not aware of any other government that had any big investments in governing northwest Syria other than Turkey. Um, so
Would it
so
help to put a map up? I got a map that shows different areas.
yeah.
Chris, why don't you put that on the screen? So Nidal, because not everybody's familiar with, there we go. So this was published in BBC today and, or yesterday or 2 days
Yeah,
ago.
we will have to have the name of Idlib in one of the in the maps, because it is the center of all the what
But it's,
happened, which
yeah,
is
it's in
it,
northeast corner to the left of Aleppo, right?
yes, sir. It is. It's yeah. It is between Aleppo and Homs. This colored in red. This is red, right?
Yeah, red is the HTS controlled
Yes.
territory.
So this is exactly where we're governing part of this area, not all of it. So so now they govern everything other than the SDF, the Kurdish led forces, basically, and
And that's in the northeast, the Kurdish-led forces.
yes, exactly. So so basically, um, so basically, like this governance attempt that, or experience that HTS built, it was not built by HTS itself. It was built by the Syrian civil society, by the Syrian activists, by some other institutions and the INGOs and 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 the Turks. I mean, to be very clear about it. Um, Well, then, as anyone else in this world, I was really surprised with what happened. That they took over the other governments, and they moved very quickly from north to south, and the regime collapsed. Um, so and then I would like the first reaction that I started to watch in news and to hear from non-Syrian people, or that, like, oh, Al Qaeda took over Damascus, the Al Qaeda affiliated, etc. And I understand that, but there is people only knew Syria during the war. This was the introduction. This is how Syria introduced itself to the world. This is how people started to hear about Syria, the war. And the war then, like Al Qaeda and ISIS and all these radical groups and extremists. But they really did not know Syria as people, as society, and what kind uh, of beliefs Syrians like carry. Syria is a very, 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 like, the Islam in Syria is very modest. I mean, like, Syrians are they follow the like kind of Islam, like the Sufi Islam, the very, very, very traditional to some, like to an extent, that it is like the values and customs and the traditions of Islam is part of um, the culture of the Syrian people and everyone. I mean, like not only the Syrian Muslims, like everyone in Syria, like the Christians and Durzi and other minorities, like they have this Islamic culture in a way or another. And it's not a joke because Syria is one of these places that you will find a mosque, like a mosque and the church, they share a wall. And literally this is Damascus, this is all Damascus, this is like other areas in Syria, like there is Zor, like Aleppo. So it's very diverse, and and this diversity like produced far or accompanied with like the socio-economic, with the economic nature of the Syrian cities, because most of the Syrians, they are merchants, and they believe and they work in commerce. So this socio-economic culture of the Syrians produced like a very peaceful environment. Like it might sound a little bit surreal to hear peaceful environment in a country that has been in a war for the last 13 years, but also we have to lay out the fact that not that the war in Syria was not. I refuse to use, and I always rejected the terminology civil war, because it was not. It was a war between troops of Russia and Iran and Hezbollah against the Syrian people, including the Syrian army. So all these forces were just fighting outside, like it's all external forces fighting the rebels inside Syria. So the civil war, the term civil war is really can deceive our impression about what happened in Syria. Um, but anyway, what what we have seen in the last week, between last Friday and today, Saturday, is and now I'm going to just tell you what people are talking about, what people in Syria are telling me. Um, it was like very significant to see that when the rebels entered, that they sat with the prime minister of Al-Assad regime, and they agreed right away on a plan, not only to transition but also to how to keep running all the institutions of the government. This was the very first thing that the rebels did, is how to keep the institutions of the government working and functioning. um, and and it was very smooth in a way that made people like think or rethink their ideas or opinions about what about these groups, because people who lived for in the last 10 years disconnected from HTS, from Northwest, and they have been always living under the Assad regime. Also, they do not know these people who came from Northwest very well. I'm not saying that they are foreigners or strangers, but there was disconnect between the north and the south and the rest of northwest and the rest of Syria. So once these people came out of Idlib, and the other rebels went from the south toward Damascus, like we could see what I saw actually in my my impression was is it's completely like all the boundaries and the limitations that uh, prevented Syrians from talking to each other for the last 13 years collapsed suddenly. This was the sudden collapse that I really could not really believe, um, and I'm still processing until now, to like how fast and quick it was that Syrians came together very quickly, uh, and and I believe that this, like the moves that HTS made, it was like actually what made this possible. Um, so then, when HTS and the other armed groups that under HTS and the other rebel groups, when they started going to the houses, no, before that, like the second thing, like simultaneously, actually, while they were trying to figure out with the former government how to keep running how to keep the institutions of the government functioning, they went to the prisons and they freed everyone they found alive in these prisons. And it's like they, like, as much as it was like a one of the happiest moments in the life of anyone who lived in Syria, as much as also it showed the brutality, the hidden brutality that we only heard about, but we never saw in our own eyes. Only people who lived and imprisoned in these prisons know this experience. And when my friends were inside Naya and then they were released in like in 2009 and in 2010, they were like telling me the stories about Said Naya, but none of them really had the words to be able to explain what we have seen in the last, like in these prisons. So freeing all these prisoners and giving closure to all the families and to the mothers and fathers who were waiting for to see to know whether their beloved ones are still alive or dead. So now they know that they lost their family forever, their loved ones forever. So they have the closure and they can grieve now. And I think this very emotional and sentimental aspect of freeing the prisoners and reuniting them with their families um, is what brought all Syrians together in this in a matter of moments, actually. Um, so I think, and to be honest, also, when I talk to people now in Damascus, because most of my friends are in Damascus, they don't care today about the noise that's coming from the outside their world, outside of the borders in Syria. All what they don't hear the words of HTS terrorists. Like they don't care about it. I mean, they don't believe it. They don't see it on the ground. So there is no reason for them to believe on it or have these concerns or worry about the worries of the Western governments these days. So this is where they are. Everything I hear from them is about how they are trying to show, to express their feelings of about living without or sleeping one night without worrying that there is a security service apparatus that is gonna invade your house and take you or your family to the prisons. This, like, it's something I like. I don't know how to express it. I mean, I wish I was there, but I'm not. But I mean, like, really, because in Syria we always had this phobia of you are not safe at all. You are afraid all the time that, and you have like this paranoia of someone's gonna grab you from the back and throw you in some jail and you will disappear. People don't have this fear anymore, and they are expressing how happy they are about it. And they were like, and they were. Everyone is working together these days. People are cleaning streets and trying to work with each other to protect this victory. And in this context, so other than HTS and governance and the transition and etc., people now they are forming kind of local committees in their neighborhoods just to give a sense of community to everyone in their neighborhoods. So if there is any problem with with break in the future, or any misunderstanding or any fears that people have, they will sit and talk about it, and they will solve it locally in their neighborhoods. And this is something that Al Assad prevented all his life. So people are happy, and I am very optimistic. I have two concerns, uh, and they are not related to the Syrian people. Actually, they are related to powers from outside. I am concerned about what the Israelis are doing now. They destroyed every capability, military capability of for the Syrians. Okay, um, this is like the Israeli security and defense uh, mechanism. Fine, uh, but also they are occupying, they are expanding, they are occupying, or they invaded Syria in the south, and they took over the whole Golan Heights. And yesterday, Netanyahu gave orders for his army to prepare to stay in the newly occupied areas during winter. So like this is one of the Israeli things that they say that we are coming temporary, but they stay forever, and this is something really worries me. Um, Especially that the Syrians will not go to another war. But I am worried, genuinely worried, that the Syrian desire to not go to any war anymore with anyone is going to be taken for advantage by Israel and by by the U.S. government, because until today we really do not have a sense about the U.S. Strategy or policy towards northeast Syria. Unfortunately, all Syria was happy in the last few days, except northeast. So when people took to the streets in the Zor area and in northeast Syria in general, the SDF like shot them. Like they killed about 10 people in these protests because people were demanding that they want to reunite with Damascus. And the U.S. until today really did not show uh, any plan to reunite northeast with Damascus, and to let the Syrian people themselves decide what kind of government and governance they want to produce, and they really don't need any advice from anyone these days. I mean, like the Syrian people are totally capable and able to produce a governance body for all Syrians, and like that would include all Syrian sects and minorities and all these concerns that the world has today, and to function on their own and to build bridges between themselves and their other Syrian brothers and sisters in northeast Syria, because in northeast Syria, whether they are Kurds or Arabs or Assyrians or whatever, or Turkmen, or whatever their religion or sect is or ethnicity, they are all Syrians, and they realize that and they know that. But until today, I am really worried that the U.S. government will deal and with Syria as with the same guidelines that the U.S. government used in Afghanistan or any other or Iraq for that matter, and this will not be good. This will not produce a stable and unified Syria. This will produce unstable and divided Syria, and then we might see the comeback of ISIS and other extremist groups like Al Qaeda also. So I am kind of certain. I did not really establish. Research in the last or coherent research in the last few months, but I have been working on the Arab Kurdish issue in northeast Syria for the last specifically for the last 4 years, and and it worries me. It scares me actually that this is where we might see a civil war if the U.S. government does not play a positive role that it would like really uh, based on the rights of the indigenous people of that area, like the Arabs and the Kurds. Uh, but like the current policy that it was established by during Obama by Brett McGurk, it's divisive and it is not gonna be helpful. And actually, like to be honest with you, it deteriorated the situation in Syria in the past, and I am very worried about this issue. So these two concerns I have are really coming uh, from the U.S. government not knowing what to do in Syria, because like until today we really like they are in contact with HTS, like Blinken said it this morning in his press conference in Jordan, and they are talking to them about building a unified, inclusive government and constitution. And but we have not heard at all from Biden's administration about their plans for northeast Syria. We have been always complaining, and we were right, that Syria is occupied by Russia, by Iran, by militias, by etc. Today, they are all gone, and the Russians they are evacuating their military bases, and they are putting everything in the one base on the coastal area in western Syria. So now the only two military powers that we really have in Syria, or three powers, we have Israel, the US, and Turkey. But I cannot really work or treat the Turkish national security and foreign policy in the same way I would say like the United States, because Turkey is on the borders and they share long borders with Syria, about 600 kilometers, and they have about 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. um, but but Israel, I mean, like, oh, okay, Israel still occupies Golan Heights and now occupied more areas in Syria, um, and the U.S. has not, the government has not given us any plan for like what's gonna happen next. Uh, and the U.S. policy toward the Middle East, it really needs a revision. It really needs a full revision after what happened in Syria. They cannot keep doing the same things over and over and falling, and not only falling in their policies, but also failing, but also like building failed states like Iraq, for example, and or Taliban in Afghanistan. Um,
Nidal, I hear you about Israel. I know they told people in 19 villages in the Golan Heights to evacuate. It's not like they're going to be there temporarily. They're going to take that. They got strategic high ground on Mount Hermon, which gives them better radar surveillance. So that, it's against international law, but they're doing it. And that the U.S. is looking the other way. When it comes to the Northeast, I'm concerned about Turkey, who have been attacking the Kurds, discriminate against the Kurds. And Deir ez-Zor, I know that the SDF had an agreement with HTS. They moved out of Deir ez-Zor recently. Although what happened, shouldn't have happened during those demonstrations. But I'm concerned, U.S. is in, supporting the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are Kurdish-led, nominally to keep ISIS at bay, which still has cells and little bits of territory in the desert. And they're also holding on to the oil, although a lot of that was sold to the Assad regime and presumably would continue to go to Damascus. But I'm concerned that Turkey, which is also a NATO ally of the U.S., is going to take more land from the Kurds and keep that war going. And and then we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, Biden's on the way out. Trump is on the way in. There was one point in the Trump administration where he said, we're pulling the troops out of Syria, and had an agreement with Putin to do that, which would have left the Kurds hanging by themselves, who have a saying, our only friends are the mountains. And I think they understand even their relationship with the U.S. is transactional, not, principled. So I wonder how you feel about Turkey's assaults on the Kurds.
oh no, I mean, like Turkey, there is the Kurds in general, like they are one other group of minorities in the Middle East that have been suffering for the last 100 years, since like the colonial era to the Middle East and Sykes-Picot agreement between France and Britain, which like the Kurds paid the heavy price of it, by the way, because they are the minority that did not get any land and any statehood. And I don't see any way, and this was something actually, it was something like I've tried with some other Syrian scholars and activists here in DC to do in the past, is to encourage the United States to build a bridge between the Kurds in Syria and the Turkish government. Because there is no way that the Kurds will leave their region, and it's not justice to for them to keep this being displaced from another a place to another, and to be killed by the Turks. But Turkey is also a big country and a strong country with a strong army, that we all know that no one can, like the Kurds cannot face it and cannot wage a war against Turkey. In this context, the only solution I see is that the U.S., with the leverage and power they have, with the relationships with the Kurds and with the relationship with Turkey, is to work on an inclusive solution within one Syria, to not divide Syria, bring the Kurds, whoever they are and whoever they think that they are their representatives, and put them in one room around one table, in Damascus and let them negotiate with HTS. Otherwise, otherwise this is going to escalate into a war, and a war that the Syrians cannot afford anymore, and a war that the Kurds will be on their own in it. To be honest with you, no one will fight with them. So, especially because also uh, the U.S. government in the last years since 2014, since the establishment of the coalition, the international coalition to defeat ISIS that the U.S. led, the U.S. did not really play or paid attention to the relation between the Arabs and Kurds in northeast Syria, and this gap between Arabs and Kurds started to widen over the years, and we really were on like we were on the verge of a civil war in northeast Syria had the regime in Damascus not fallen. We were this close. Because the feelings of the Arabs in the resort that they don't control their areas, they don't benefit from the sources and resources in their communities is increasing, and the oil thing is a big issue, and the U.S. is protecting all the oil fields, almost all the oil fields in northeast Syria, and people do not see any benefit from the revenue of the oil, and the agriculture industry also, and other like the whole socio-econ or the economic system that the U.S. created in northeast Syria with the support by supporting SDF like this one group against and ignoring the other groups in northeast Syria produced this gap. And I agree with you that it's going to be scary if it does not get solved between the Syrian Kurds and the Syrians in Damascus. It will not be solved by Turkey. It will not be solved by the US. It will not be solved by anyone. But the US can play a positive role and can play a negative role in this too. And Turkey also the same. What Turkey is doing actually now, and this part of Turkey that scares me, other than like sending the drones and etc., they are pushing the Syrian National Army to fight the Kurds. So they are putting the Syrians against themselves, against each other one more time. So this in this sense, yes, I am worried, and there is no way to reach a solution other than talking and negotiating. One good sign, though, came from northeast Syria and from SDF, is that they took down all the SDF and YPG and flags from the government institutions, and they put the Syrian flag, the new Syrian flag, which is like a good sign. It's helpful and hopeful. Uh, but however, like the US, I don't know how quickly they can. The government has only like 5 weeks left in the White House, and then Trump is gonna come with a completely different vision to the region, and most likely it's gonna be a withdrawal. Um, so this should be discussed well within the White House in a way that would protect the interest of Syria, of the United States, and keep Syria united, whatever this unity is.
Yeah, I have heard that the SDF has communicated to HTS that they want to talk. They do want a political solution. So hopefully that process continues.
And one more thing about this issue, like Kurds, they have been deprived from their rights in Syria since like 60s. So they cannot use their language. They don't teach their language in schools. They are not even allowed to use it in the streets. Like you can, like even if you, it's against the law to speak Kurdish. Basically, this is one of the establishments of al-Assad's, the father Hafiz al-Assad in Syria. Uh, so many hundreds of thousands, of course, they were documentless, or even though they are like they have like roots in where they born in northeast Syria, but they were documentless. They did not have the right to have an ID card. They did not have the right to have to go to universities, etc. So they have been in tough and understandably uh, uh, situation that it makes them traumatized and worried about the future, their about their situation and their position in the new Syria, and only Syrians themselves and everywhere else in Syria can give the Kurds this guarantee and this sense of security and safety.
I saw we had a few questions, so why don't we get to those? And see, well, I can see him in the chat. Scout Trooper 164. Here we go. Oh. Yeah. Do you think Russia losing their air force bases in Syria will have a big impact or not? Asking because while it loses impact in Africa, it may only harm their reputation for a time.
Well, they are moving everything to Libya now. So basically, they are staying in the Mediterranean. So they moved yesterday and this morning. They moved some of their machinery and weapons to Libya. So this is one. Uh, on the other hand, uh, the falling of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria is the falling of the socialist bloc that during of that the Soviet era created in the Middle East. So like and so it is very it's very important for Russians because Russians they always had interest in Syria. Basically, they built the Syrian institutions. They built the Syrian security with Eastern Germany back then, and the Syrian army. So. One of the consequences that the Russians do not want to admit, or they admitted it in a way or another, is they lost the war in Syria. And losing the war in Syria, it means that you are losing your military bases and you are losing the air force. Yes, I think the falling of Bashar al-Assad was like also the falling of the Russian interest in Syria. Um, they have some guarantees from the current government in Damascus, um, and I see that the new approach that the Syrians in general will follow is that they want to be friends with everyone. um, and they are and what they the statements that they released that they don't have problem with Russia and the country and they won't build like bridges or good relationships, etc. But this will take time, and this might need in the future that the Russians will send Bashar al-Assad back to Syria for accountability, because Bashar al-Assad should be held accountable for all the crimes he committed against the Syrian people, and he is sitting in Moscow today, and he should not be staying there and like as if he is in exile. Um, so this might be the price of keeping good relationships with Russia.
So I saw that Scout Trooper 164 added, it's also funny as the Syrian rebels showed Russia how to do a 3-day special military operation. So
That's
they
yeah.
did.
I mean, let's be clear about it, and be very honest about it. Um, like Israel dismantled the capabilities and the ability of Hezbollah in Syria to be able to fight, and this came to the advantage of the Syrian rebels. And the Iranians also lost the axis of resistance war in the Middle East, and this also came to the advantage of the Syrian rebels. I am not saying that the Syrian rebels they were communicating with the Israelis, because I don't know this happened, but I see that like this what you call 3 day special military operation is done and done very well, because they took advantage of the opportunity and in the right time.
Andrew Hager, I know many Syrian refugees need help, but what about the animals that inhabit Syria? Do they need help too?
Well, um, it's a good question. You know, like in the last until today, we really do not we did not have any study about the environment and the climate change, the impact of the war on the environment and climate change in Syria. Because one of the big things that we noticed in the last uh, 10 years of especially of the war is that the Euphrates River is drying, and this like really threatens uh, the the fishing industry in that area. Um, but it is very important to start paying attention to this issue, and it really did not cross my mind until now. You brought it up, Andrew, because it's very important to see how the war and especially the weapons that they were used in Syria, how they impacted the environment and the animals in Syria and who are inhabiting Syria. I really don't have. There are no studies about that at all whatsoever. I am sure about that.
Yeah, the question of refugees, I just want to mention that already in Europe, and no doubt when Trump comes in, there's going to be efforts to push the Syrians who are refugees back to Syria before they may be able, ready to go back, before they even have a home to go to, because a lot of the homes are rubble.
Yeah,
So that's an issue that we've got to be watching and say something about.
but some NGOs, yeah, like they are saying that the camps, the IDP camps inside Syria and northwest, and the camps in Turkey, they are almost empty now because people are returning to their homes, and they are like if their homes is destroyed, they are putting the tent next to their home. And we have seen a lot of really beautiful return of hundreds of thousands of Syrians in the last few days to where they belong.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. I'm thinking about people who made it to Europe or the United States.
Well,
And
in Europe, it's a little bit different because in Europe, so like there are percentage of people who became citizens, and I am sure that so many of them will go back and try to work out in Syria. But also, I like me knowing the Syrians, I think many of them will go back and return without like you don't need to push them out. They will go on their own because like Syrians, they are really nationalists. They really like love their country. Um, and especially for people who have been refugees for the last 10 years and they were not able to get any citizenship or any rights in the Western world, right? Let's see. But I am sure once the airport in Syria starts to function, which is supposed to be like be functioning domestically, I think on the 18th of this month, in a few days. Once it's open to for international flights, you're gonna see like how many people will return to Syria from Europe and from here from the US.
Chris Blankenhorn, it's encouraging that coming out over a decade of chaos with an uncertain future, that communities are banding together at a grassroots level to self-organize and govern.
Well, listen, it's not only inside Syria. I think what we have seen in the last 10 days is really phenomenal. It's really extraordinary, and it's significant. And Syria today, like the world, has an opportunity again to show uh, good will and good support, and how to produce a model for like a safe and secure and stable country after a decade of war. And I really hope that the Israelis stop their expansion and their military bases, because now the Israelis are missing a golden opportunity to start a new chapter with the Syrian people. Um, and if they keep doing what they are doing now, they're gonna lose it forever.
Okay, I brought pulled some resources together for people that we should start putting in the chat. Chris, the first three I want to put up are two by Anand Gopal and article by Louis Proyect, who wrote an article about a meeting that Anand spoke at. Anand is a fearless journalist who got a lot of prizes for a book he wrote on Afghanistan, where he went and talked, to the rebels. And he, when the U.S. was trying to get him like he were them, and then he went into Syria, and in the early 2010s to find out, what was going on at the grassroots level. And he documents how in Sarkib and Manjib, the grassroots movement rejected both the Assad regime and Al Qaeda, and with their popular movement. And so, the first article is from Jacobin. It's called Syria: What Comes After the Despot. And that article, because Anand really has a good sense of class and social networks in Syria, he backs up what Nidal was saying about people at the grassroots coming together. And, you can't read Syrian politics by the ideology of Al Qaeda or its descendants. You really have to look at what the people are doing. And so that's very good. The second article by him is in the New Yorker. Unfortunately, it's behind a paywall. So if you can't get to that, there was a meeting where Anand spoke I was at that Louis Project wrote an article about. And it's a short article that explains what Anand showed. And he showed films in Sarkib how Al Qaeda came in there and they wanted to shut down the elected council and arrest the leaders. And the people came out in mass, and Al Qaeda shot at them with machine guns, and one of them was killed. And the people ran off, and then they came back. And they ran Al Qaeda out of the town without arms. Al Qaeda just concluded they can't govern these people. So there really was a revolution going on at the grassroots, and Anand really captures that. And then I have an article by Joseph Dahir, Understanding the Rebellion in Syria, and two by Gilbert Achkar. And they are leftists. Gilbert's a Lebanese, and Joseph is a Swiss Syrian. They're a little less optimistic than Nidal was about how these different factions can come together. But they have good understanding. And I think those articles are worth reading. And then the last one's by Paul Mason, which I think is a fun read because he basically makes fun of the tankies who are in the pro-Putin pseudo-left and are mourning the loss of Assad. And I think it's actually a fun article to read, given that, they got their comeuppance and they're having a hard time explaining themselves. So, take down those links and read them when you can. And Nidal, I really appreciate you coming on. I think your, direct knowledge of what's been going on with the Syrian people and being able to talk to them is a lot better than we can get from almost anybody. And so I hope people appreciated that. And Nidal hooked me up with his brother and sister-in-law when I was in Berlin on my trip, and we had a great conversation. And we were going to go to an Italian restaurant, but it was booked up, so they cooked their own lasagna, which was really good. So I enjoyed that, and thanks for hooking us up, Nidal. So next week, it's the 30th anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons in return for security guarantees and recognition of the territorial integrity of Ukraine by Russia, the US, France, and Great Britain. And of course, that didn't happen. So, and given all the talk about, this thing turning into a nuclear war, it seemed appropriate. So we'll have Dennis Bondar back. Actually, he'll be the second person to be on 3 times. He's a physicist at Tulane, a Ukrainian, and very much up on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant crisis and the politics of Syria and the international situation. So that'll be next week. And, we'll keep meeting. I guess people are going to want to ask me about my trip, maybe on the 28th of this month. We'll not have a guest, but you can ask me all the questions you want. From Georgia, where I witnessed the beginnings of what's happening now, this mass outpouring against what people consider rigged elections and a turn away from the EU by the Georgia Dream governing party, to Ukraine, to Greens I met in where was I? Poland, Germany, Czech Republic, and England and Ireland. So maybe you can ask me questions. I'll tell you briefly, what happened, and then we can talk about that on the 28th. So those things are coming up. And once again, thank you, Nidal, and I will see everybody next week.
Thank you.